want us to have a conversation this evening. It's a difficult conversation, and it's one that is incumbent upon America to have. And we are a part of the American experience, and therefore we have to have this conversation. Now, this is a conversation that we're going to begin tonight. We're not going to conclude this conversation. If there is any kind of conclusion or concluding to be done with this type of weighted conversation, the gravity of the dialogue, the immensity of its import for what it means to actually live in an America, to live in a world, and especially in this day and age. This is a conversation that we cannot avoid. For some of you, this is a conversation that you started a long time ago, and that sadly, we have to come back to it again, and I don't think we'll ever really finish, and over the course of our lives, we'll come back to this conversation over and over again, and so we have come now to have this conversation again. I want to begin this conversation about race and race ideas and race policies and racialized violence. That is all too important in this particular moment. The violence on display in Charlottesville, Virginia on August 12th, 2017 opens up the question of violence instigated and perpetuated by some pro-white American nationalists of various stripes under the banner of the alt-right or the alternative right. To be fair, among the social justice warriors gathered there, they were also resisting the pro-white nationalists. But some of them were violent too. Some of them were violent actors. It would be a mistake to collapse, though, the distinction between those whose program it was to highlight class division, champion racial and ethnic inequality, and to advance notions of cultural hierarchy in the name of white solidarity with those who were actually defenders of human equality, a demand for social justice and for the most vulnerable, a fair distribution of resources and an opportunity in the name of our human interconnectivity. While they might have clashed together in the streets, we are right to view aggressive hate and aggressive resistance to hate not on the same moral terms. So those who perpetuate violence in the name of hate do not stand on the same moral equivalency of those who may be aggressive in their defense in the retarding of those who are advancing hatred. This seems like a pedantic clarification, but it's one that is needed in the crowd of noise that is buzzing about what is truth. Here I will invoke Ibram X. Kendi's book, Stamped from the Beginning, The Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America, as a way of situating our conversation about race. Stamped from the Beginning won the 2006 National Book Award for nonfiction. I know some of you have it on your desk now. It's a massive tome, about 500 pages, so it's a little light reading. This book has changed the terms of how we are to talk and think about race in America. Professor Kendi places matters of race into a larger framework of how race and racial ideas have been produced, by turn in how race and anti-racist racism, sometimes by the same person, sometimes in the same sentence, have also often been espoused. Yes, it is indeed the case that one can express racial ideas, racist ideas, and anti-racist sentiments in the same sentence. Kendi explains, There was nothing simple or straightforward or predictable about race ideas, and thus their history. Frankly speaking, a generation for generations of Americans, racist ideas have manipulated millions over the years, muffling the more complex anti-racist realities again and again. And so this history could not be made for readers in an easy-to-predict, two-sided Hollywood battle of obvious good versus obvious evil, with good triumphing in the end. So this is not the kind of conversation that we can pit in the typical dramatic, cinematic form where there are good folks and bad folks and the good win in the end. When it comes to race, it is more tricky than that. What is tricky about race or racial ideas is that they are not two-sided, but indeed they are three-sided. There has always been a three-sided battle, a battle of anti-racist ideas being pitted against two kinds of racist ideas at the same time, with evil and good falling and triumphing in the end. What we take to be common sense about race and racial ideas makes it difficult to identify the real consequences of racial ideas and practices. The racial disparities in Black lives, both nationalist and assimilationist ideas, explains Candy, have been wrapped in an attractive argument to seem good, and both have made sure that the rewrapping of anti-racist ideas are seen as evil. Both racists, the racist pro-slavery apologists and the anti-racist abolitionists, operate within the same logic of racist ideas. Conversations, racist ideas about the nature of Black humanity, but neither group see or has seen its own position as harboring racist ideas. Let me be clear here. Those who have been anti-slavery, those who have been abolitionists, they themselves, while pushing for the elimination of slavery, have actually embodied the logic of anti-Black freedom. Those who are pro-slavery, those who were enslavers, who were arguing for the right of slaveholders to begin a project of civilizing the brute, themselves also inhabit the same racial logic. It is this racial logic itself that seduces us into a position where we can clarify who exactly is the racist. Who is exactly promoting anti-racist agendas? This will become clear as we begin to delve deeper into Candace's corpus. It is the case that the racists and the anti-racists, the abolitionists and the assimilationists, the segregationists too, have all wrapped their ideas inside of this racial logic, and they have articulated the opponent's idea outside of racism. Abolitionists of all hues and political stripes tend to hold ideas of Black culture and behavioral inferiority without recognizing this is a racial idea. This is a racist idea. As Kennedy writes, assimilationists define only segregationist ideas of Black biology inferiority as racist. And segregationists, too, have always resisted the label of racist. They have claimed instead that they were merely articulating God's word, nature's design, science plan, or plain old common sense. And it is in both of their interests to not see themselves as evil. What Kendi helps us to understand is that all of these self-serving efforts by powerful fractions to define racial or racist rhetoric as non-racist has left Americans thoroughly divided over in ignorance of what racists truly are. If we are going to have a meaningful conversation about race, we will need to clarify the functioning definition, a clarifying and functioning definition of what it means to hold a racist idea. It is the absence of such a definition that has allowed Americans who think something is wrong with black people to believe somehow they are not racist. But as Kendi will argue, to say something is wrong with a group is to say something is inferior about that group. And here, the interlocking logic of racist ideas marks the racist ideas that many white, spoiler alert, and black folks alike hold. We espouse these racial ideas, these racist ideas, as if they are common sense. My definition of a racist idea is a simple one, Kendi writes. It is any concept that regards one racial group as inferior or superior to another racial group in any way. By extension, an anti-racist idea is one that maintains that either explicitly or implicitly, any group of black people are inferior in any other way to any other racial group. It might come as news to some of you, but not to black folks, that we are not a monolithic group. Other than eating chicken, there is nothing that we all like or that we all do. Okay, I'm joking, but not about the chicken. Seriously, though, the point is that, like all other identifiable races, black people are in reality a collection of groups of differentiated groups by gender, class, ethnicity, sexuality, culture, skin color, profession, nationality, among a series of other identifiers, including biracial people who may or may not identify as black. What am I saying? That any group of black people, just like any other group of people, is not a whole. They are not interchangeable, but we have multiple identities, multiple sites of our identity construction, just like any other group of people. So you may find black conservatives, black liberals, black middle class, black underclass, black women, black males. You get the point. And so that to disaggregate what we commonly understand as black people, to disaggregate them from a label and actually to think about them as you think about other groups, as people who are, in Kimberly Crenshaw's terms, intersectional, meaning that our identity formations are at the site of multiple other identity formations that we hold. And if you think about it in that way, then you start to understand that when you say something like, oh, black women are strong, well, you are making a generalization about black women. In a sense, you are espousing gender racism, because not all black women behave in the same way. So you are making a racialized idea and taking that racialized idea and putting it on a whole group of women who themselves are differentiated among themselves. You get the point. so that we can come to see that there are multiple sections or intersections of racial ideas in the way that they are deployed. So you can talk about gender racism, you can talk about class racism, you can talk about political racism, you get the point. You can talk about geographical racism, and all the while you're talking about black folks. But once you lump them into one group, then those distinctions start to melt away. It's important that you get this part of Kende's logic and his thinking, because if you miss this, then you miss the importance of why he won the National Book Award. It is this idea that really is the paradigm shift that allows us to see how race operates in a new way. How so, you say? Well, what we think of as black people is really a collapsing of the distinctions of multiple identity formations and arrangements that constitutes an erroneous, generic grouping of black folks, when in actuality, they are black women, black males, black elderly, black youth, black poor, black rich, etc., etc., etc. If you grasp this point, then you can start to see into the interworkings of racial logic. And then you can expose racial ideas for what they really are. If you espouse an idea about the inferiority of any group, no matter what, you are espousing a racial or racist idea. So then, if you call yourself an advocate for black liberation, and yet you think about the black poor as if they are a group undifferentiated, you are operating out of a racist idea. But you say, I have black friends. You say, I have black experiences. I love hip hop. I watch Black-ish on TV. Right? How can I have a racist idea? How can I be advocating a racist idea? Well, you are, because you are talking about a group of people who are black as if there is something wrong with them, as if they are othered in a way, as if something lies within their own behavior, their culture, their DNA, that then explains the disparities you find among the different groups. Because we know that there are some black people, right, who are very affluent, and for whom all of those kinds of pathologies that we associated with black people are absent. And we know that there are some black people who are so situated that they themselves espouse, have digested those racist ideas about black folks. This is what we saw on stage when Chris Rock became a national celebrity, when he said that bit about, I hate N-word, right? And that the problem with black folks is the N-word, right? What Chris Rock was doing was situating himself as a black person over against another racial group called the N-word. And therefore, he was able to be all kind of racist towards that group without ever interrogating the fact that he himself is espousing a racial position. You understand what I'm saying? So that black folks have to come up short here too, and I have to confess myself that I have digested racial attitudes and ideas about black people. That I have to find myself, catch myself, to make sure that I am not doing the same thing, that I am not being caught up in the same kind of stupidity that is really racial reasoning. So when we demean the black poor, we are engaging in class racism. When we put down black lesbians and black gays and other queer people, we are likewise engaging in queer racism. When we rate black culture inferior to other cultures, we are engaging in cultural or ethnic racism. Sweeping histories, Kende says, about race and racial ideas have traditionally missed this kind of distinction. They have missed the intersecting conception of specific racial groups or even black spaces, so we can label whole sections of towns and communities as racial sections, the violent black neighborhood. You get the point. So this is not only about individuals, but geographical spaces. And we tend to do that in a way that signals our own racialized ideas. Black businesses, black schools, black churches all come under this target. This notion of multiple identity constructions among black people, or what we might call, and this is a technical for Professor Aston, this is a technical one, the non-generic racial grouping of black people is the paradigm shift that Kendi advances in his work. This disaggregation of racial ideas has allowed us to see both the general as well as the specific forms of anti-black ideas in their specific development by deployment by assimilationists and segregationists alike. How does this help us with the issues with the alt-right or the alt-left? Well, I'm glad you asked. With a clear definition of what a racial idea is, we can connect the disparities of inequality of black lives and black folks to the racial ideas and the racial policies that are attributed to black biography, biology, black biology, or black behavior. So what am I saying? So when you have a white nationalist that is promoting the defense of European culture, we're not racist, they say. We just want to preserve European culture. We want to preserve our heritage. We want to preserve that which no other ethnic group has been able to achieve in the history of civilization. We want to defend that which we will not allow other people to carry forward in the name of white people, meaning Jews, Italians, blacks will not be able to carry forth the civilization of European, but Europeans have to do that for themselves. And that's what they say they're doing. But you can see how that is a racial idea. Even if they claim not to be racist, they are locked in the interlocking logic of racism because what? They see European culture in a hierarchical form. They see European culture as above other cultures. And that is racist, if you follow Kendi's definition. What about the alt-left or the social justice warriors who were acting as against the alt-right? Well, what are they arguing for? They're arguing for a sense of integration or a sense of assimilation of peoples, right? They're arguing for a kind of bland equality. But what is missing there is the fact that inequality is not the result of racial ideas, it's the result of racial ideas put into political action. And so that the real combatant, the real front line in the war, if you want to see it that way, is not against the alt-right, but it's against the policies and the policy makers who are living out through their power the racist ideas that they have consumed. This will become clear in a moment. In the mid-1990s, a young man named Dinesh D'Souza published a book called The End of Racism: Principles for a Multicultural, Multiracial Society. It appears in 1995. In this book, which quickly became a bestseller and garnered him much attention and fame, he argued for the end of racism. He said, we have reached the moment in our history where there was no more racism, that what we had sure was some kind of ambient racism, meaning the little noise in the back, right? And so that we didn't really need the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and this was his bold assertion that we should repeal the Civil Rights Act because it was no longer necessary. We had matured as a group of people, as a nation, and therefore we no longer needed legislation to tell us how to behave. That it is clear through the evidence of social uplift, the evidence of social mobility among blacks, the rising black middle class, that racism was no longer a dominant deterrent in the life chances of black people. Bold statement. What he said is that it's not racist to make decisions based on evidence from your experience. Bear with me here. So that if you have an experience with a minority person or a black person, or you know of an experience regarding a black person or a minority person, or you hear it reported in the news of an experience of a black person or a minority person, it is rational to act on that knowledge. Let me give you an example. Suppose you are the owner of a jewelry store located on the south side of town. And that jewelry store is not often frequented by black people. And one day you hear a report on the news that in the neighboring state there has been a rash of high-end jewelry store burglaries by a gang of black people, black males. Let's just make it real nice. Then the next day, while you are busy with some customers in your store and it's about 30 minutes before closing time, a young black man walks in your door. For DeSoto, if you tell that man that you are closing and ask him to come back tomorrow, you are not being racist. Rather, you are really being rational because you are acting on information that you just heard on the news. Black men robbing jewelry stores. And therefore, you are making an assessment of the risk you are willing to take in that moment. So, even though he has plenty of time to browse, you tell him or ask him to come back. One more example. If you are white, but you live in a black neighborhood, or you went to a predominantly black school, or you played basketball or football with black teammates, you love hip hop, or you date outside your race, or have interracial children, or watch Black-ish on cable TV, or whatever. Those experiences allow you to generate generalized assumptions about black people because you have had firsthand knowledge and experience of being around them. Therefore, when you say, black people believe this, you're not talking out of anything that you don't know. You're talking out of an experience that you've had. So that when you make these kinds of generalized statements about the behavior, the abilities, the values, the politics of black people, you are doing it from a position of authority. You are doing it from a rational point of view. It is not some kind of racist or race baiting, but it is about the kind of taste that you have developed because you have been around black folks, or you've had these encounters. In short, it is not racist, but it is only natural and rational to think with what Candy would call racist ideas. For this is for DeSoto how the intelligent mind operates. That we go around the world, we move in the world making assumptions based on our prior experiences, based on indiscrete knowledge that we received, and we make those decisions based on how we encounter people. So you get on an elevator, young black boy gets on with a big old afro uncombed, you clutch your purse. Just making a decision based on the evidence, based on the experiences, based on the reporting that you've had in the newspaper, based on the monographs that you read from the sociologist professor. Probably not. And so you make those decisions. That's not rash. That's not racist. DeSoto says that's rational. For Kendi, this is not intelligence, but rather it is the interlocking logic of racism. It is the interlocking logic of racist ideas. The refusal to call individualized generalizations towards a racial group what it is, a racial stereotype. But why do people like Dinesh D'Souza put themselves in their adherence through such torture rationale, through such muddy thinking? So why do they do it? Well, Candy says it is to avoid being called a racist. It is the thing that no one wants to be called or admit to. In all of my research and study of the producers of racist ideas, asserts Candy, I have never come across anyone who admits to being a racist. Have you ever heard one come out, I'm a racist? No one has said that they're racist, yet we have all of this racism. But yet no one has called themselves a racist. Not the pro-slavery advocate, no, they didn't call themselves racist. They called the abolitionists racist. Why did they call the abolitionists racist? Because the abolitionist was daring to challenge the natural order of the way in which God created human beings. The white man's burden for them was real, to civilize the brute savage. And it was the racists who denied this fact. And actually, it is the abolitionists who stood in the way of the advancement of the white man's agenda. You see the point? No one calls themselves racist. The integrationists and the segregationists both, they didn't see themselves as racist, although they were operating and still do operate out of the notion that there is something wrong with black folks. Either they say the long history of enslavement tormented and made African Americans tragically disposed to kind of the disparities that we talk about. So then there is something wrong with black folks because slavery made them wrong, something wrong with them, deformed them. Or maybe it was the millennia of cultural backwardness from Africa, right, that has made them less suited to enter into the playing field of modern day civilization. See, this assumption is still that there is something wrong with black folks, even if they were advancing anti-black causes. This is, for this reason, and here Candy and D'Souza, they actually come into the same territory. They actually converge in the way in which they understand the motivations for why both groups, or all groups, resist calling themselves racist. The reason, Candy says, is because it is in their self-interest to do so. Both Candy and Dususu say this. It appears that following the common sense logic of racist thinking makes it in our own self-interest not to see ourselves as being or being led by racist ideas. Racists confessing to their crimes is not in the self-interest of the racists, writes Candy. The real trouble with this sort of racial thinking is that it too often drives policies, laws, and social programs with devastating effects on the lives of Black people. The embedding of racist ideas within criminal codes has led to the war on crime being a war on Black bodies. In the reality of the U.S. having the largest incarceral population in the civilized world, 40% of all U.S. prisoners are Black folks, despite the fact that less than 15% of the total population is Black. Are we really to believe that the percentage of criminal behavior in the Black population is nearly 300 times the percentage of criminal behavior in the white population? I dare not. I began this talk with the spectacle of violence in Charlottesville, Virginia. I've argued that racial-motivated violence and violent resistance to such violence are not morally equivalent. And to say otherwise is to signal that you are trapped into the racial logic of racist thinking. That is, following Candy's definition that a racist idea is any suggestion that any racial group is inferior to another in any way, exposes racial ideas in the policies, programs, and attitudes that spring from them in a clear way. Lastly, I have challenged those who hold such generalizations about racial groups based upon individual experiences as racist, as in holding racist ideas. We do not permit that kind of thinking in any other sphere, except when it comes to minoritized groups. Rather, we call it for what it is, and that is racial stereotypical racist thinking. In the brief time I have left, let me say something about the question of violence. I want to bring the question closer to home and to talk about violence in Fort Wayne. Specifically, I want to talk about the ways in which violence has been racialized here, and how the racialization of violence might be creating anti-Black policies, which themselves further the racial disparities in the life chances of Blacks in Fort Wayne. No doubt most of you here have heard about violence in Black neighborhoods. You've heard about the violent Black neighborhood. And if you were asked today, and you are a native of Fort Wayne, or you've lived here long enough to drink a lot of the water, to point me to the section of town where the violence occurs, you would not hesitate to point me to the South Fort Wayne section. So you say, well, this is not racist. How is this racist? After all, the city's 42 homicides in the last year, of those 42 homicides, the vast majority of them were committed on or near the south side of the city. How is this racist? You might even go on further to say that most of those homicides which occurred in that area of the city involved young African-American males. How is this racist? Now, this, you would say, are the simple facts. About 80% of the city's Black population lives on the south side of Fort Wayne, the South Fort Wayne. Most of the homicides occur there and indeed involve young males. So these are the facts. So it's not racist to hold that the south side of Fort Wayne is a violent area of the city. You with me? Well, you might be right. But it is wrong to conclude from the evidence and the information at hand that the south side of Fort Wayne is any more or any less violent than any other area of the city. Moreover, it would be racist, a racist idea to conclude from the facts as we know them that young black males who reside on the south side of Fort Wayne are any more or any less violent than young males who reside in any other residential area of our city. We just don't have that kind of evidence. To understand what I'm getting at as tonight, let me talk about something about the way crime data is reported. Crime data is reported by two things. One, arrest and incarcerations. So you have to be arrested, and then the incarceration rates. That's how crime statistics are populated off of that data. So in order, there must be an arrest, then there must be an incarceration, and then that data is taken to compile the violence in a particular area. Now, we know that violence is happening all over this city, that people everywhere in this city are experiencing violence. So, in fact, we have no idea how much violence is occurring anywhere in the city because in order for it to be counted in the statistics, it must be reported. And there must be arrest and someone must be incarcerated. But we know violence is happening all the time and not all of that violence is being reported in any kind of way. So we cannot conclude that the south side of Fort Wayne is violent or any more violent than any other section because we do not have the evidence to make such an assertion. You get my point. What about homicides, you'll say? And I see you thinking now, you're all ahead of me. You say, well, what about those homicides? Yeah, you have a point there, but let me say something about those homicides. It is clear that young black males are dying at the hands of their peers. And so you say something is wrong there. Well, I agree, something is wrong. There is something wrong here, but what is wrong is our thinking that something is wrong with young black males. In fact, you can argue, as Kendi does, that the number one problem that black folks face is that people think something is wrong with black folks. And here I'm talking about black folks too. Black people are any more or less likely to be killed by any other black person than any white person is more or less likely to be killed by another white person. Likewise, you are not any more likely or any less likely to be killed by someone who resides in the area of town near or by the area of town that you reside in. The fact of the matter is, ladies and gentlemen, people who live by each other or close by each other tend to be the ones who are involved in homicides towards each other. So that people who live by each other, and we have a problem with stubborn residential segregation. Black folks tend to live by black folks. And it happens to be the case that 80% of black folks live in the south side of Fort Wayne. And therefore, if people who live by each other tend to commit homicidal acts towards each other, black-on-black crime is really a myth because all crime tends to be based on racial groups, based on geographical locations. You get my point? So homicides among blacks is not a problem of black-on-black crime. Crimes occur among and between ethnic groups wherever they occur. Thinking that there is something wrong with black folks has allowed us to miss the point about what is happening in our communities, and then allows us to create policies that reinscribe those very disparities that we want to try to combat. Now let me come back to this issue of homicides in particular. We often hear touted the number of murders in the south side of town. Last year, I believe they say the total of homicides was anywhere between 42 or 43. And I am and I am as the report of these deaths are, that they point out that they happen among a certain slice of the population on the south side of town, that the majority of these homicides have occurred in a particular geographical location in between a slice of the black community, the young black males. Well, if you think about homicides as deaths, do you know how many deaths in Fort Wayne were due to driving while under the influence? No. 40. 42 homicides, 40 deaths due to driving while under the influence. Who is dying in those automobile accidents? Is it black folks? No. Largely white people. Who is the perpetrator, the largest percentage of the population that is driving while under the influence? Do you know who that is? White males. Where do they live? Where do these accidents occur? Largely in suburban areas, not on the south side of town. As a matter of fact, driving while under the influence, the rate of people being stopped while driving under the influence is at the lowest of all ethnic groups in the city among the black folks. The highest is white males. But yet we are not talking about white males as committing vehicular homicide. We are not trembling when we drive in the suburbs and we look and we see a white man behind the car. Do we shake and quiver because he may be drunk and he may swerve over and kill me with his car? So that murder, deaths are being racialized in our city. So that homicides committed on a certain in a certain geographical location is being racialized, and not only racialized, but racialized black youth males. But yet we don't racialize the homicides, the murders that occur among white males in the suburban area. Just one last point, and I know you guys have been so kind. Just the other day on the news, they talked about accidents and automobile accidents, and you probably heard it on the news because it was a big crash on US 30 about the truck that overturned and squashed somebody and and someone died in the scene. You know what they called that? That was US 30. They called that the death corridor because so many deaths have occurred in that bend, that area, that they're calling it the death corridor. This is in the Allen County area, but nobody really started to racialize that to say who's dying in those car crashes. Who are the people involved in those car crashes? Where is the geography located in that car crash? Are we saying that there is a white truck driving epidemic of killing people on US 30? No, we're not. We're not racializing it. And I'm saying that the racialization of homicides and violence in Fort Wayne has masked the racist policies and the racist ideas that are being targeted towards black youth and black people on the south side of town that is, in fact, widening the disparities because it's missing the mark. Let me just conclude here. There is nothing wrong with black people. Nothing. Except that we think something is wrong with black people. Now, what we have here, of course, is what? The largest, the most significant correlation between violence, homicides, is not race, is not age. You know what it is? Unemployment. Unemployment and poverty. It tends to be the case by all analysis that poor people who are out of jobs tend to act in violent ways, that there is violence among poor and impoverished people who are locked out of the economic sector, the labor sector, that those communities become ridden with violence. So when you talk about a violent community, really you're talking about a poor community. So that if you want to address the problem of violence in the community, you have to address the problem of unemployment and poverty. It's not that the black folks are the problem, that they don't have morality. They do have an ethic system. It might not be one you like, but they have one. What they don't have is an entree into the economic system. What they don't have are the resources prerequisite for being able to withstand when the accidents of life happen, and they will happen. Last thing, and I'll close. The economic downturn of 2007 has devastated black and brown communities when it comes to wealth accumulation. I'm talking about serious devastation. Black middle class, the black solid middle class, before the economic downturn had a average wealth, household wealth of somewhere around $138,000. By the end of that deep recession, it was cut down to $32,000. That's serious, and that's for our middle class. Imagine what it is for the poor. The last report just came out a couple of days ago. They put it on the news. Did you hear it? They said that it is the case that the average American cannot muster up enough money in their household to withstand some kind of crisis that required $1,000. $1,000. The average American, if they had a crisis, somebody gets arrested, somebody gets a toe cut, or some kind of issue happens, they can't amass $1,000 to address it. They don't have that kind of wealth, that savings. They don't have that cushion. Imagine what it's like for black folks who are in a impoverished situation, locked out of the labor economy. This is what happened to Sandra Bland. Her parents, her network, could not come up with the $500 bail money that she needed to get out on bond. And therefore, she spent that time in the jail system, away from her support system, away from her family, out of her state, and she could not take it. She was already having her own issues, and she could not take it, and she ended her own life. $500. By engaging in racial reasoning, the interlocking logic of racism, we inhabit and deploy racial ideas that get us off track of the real issue, which are racial policies and practices and programs. Thank you so much for being so kind to listen to me, and being so kind of an audience to be attentive. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
I really appreciate the thought process and the critical analysis of the situation. And I'm outside of my league here because my background is engineering. But in listening to your conceptualization of the ideas, to what extent do you think the national agenda on the world stage, the way our government attacks other races and the thought processes, because we're not attacking other white nations, we're attacking brown nations. To what extent do you think that plays into the whole paradigm of the things that we're going through down below?
Oh, no, that's a wonderful question. I think it's right in sync with it, right? So there are people who are saying that that they are great friends with President Trump in that they know him. These are people who are our legislators, right? And they said they know him in that he doesn't have a racist bone in his body. It is clear that Trump is caught into this racial interlocking logic of racism. And it's clear that he has now the levers of power to instantiate that way of thinking into policies, in governance, that is having an effect of actually creating more disparities. He himself may not understand that he is in that interlocking position of logic of racism. And therefore, he may actually believe that he's not a racist. But we know that nobody comes out and say, I'm a racist, right? No one says that. It takes someone to get in there to untangle those, but at the policy level, and I think this is your point, and on the global scale, people all around the world know, they see what it is, right? They see what's happening. But it is the case that because of the nature of modernity as it relates to the global markets and such, that people are operating out of their own best interests. So it is self-interest that is driving nations and in not only nations but states and even local actors of policyholders to continue to hold up and prop up what we see as evident in our leader. The Supreme Court, pushed back on his immigration policy because they said this is clearly motivated by racism, right? And that those kinds of motivations embedded into policies, no matter what defense they have, are against our Constitution. And how he swims out of that, I don't know,